Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I see participants starting to sign in, so let's wait a couple of minutes. Welcome, everyone. We're going to start in a few minutes. Okay, I think we can start. We'll still log in. Greetings from Geneva and welcome everyone to today's webinar on climate change, negotiations and health. My name is Patricia Martin-Neriones. I'm a program officer at UNITAR's Division of Multilateral Diplomacy. I would like to extend to all of you a warm welcome and thank you for joining us for this activity. Today's webinar is the second webinar and last webinar offered as part of the WHO, UNITAR, and UN CICILEARN online course on climate change, negotiations, and health. Today's agenda is going to be divided into 3 blocks. The first block will be a presentation of multi-party negotiations on climate change and health. And our panelists for our first block is our dear colleague Elena Villalobos-Prats from WHO. The second block will be an interactive presentation that will be given by Ms. Ana Maria Kleinmeyer. Ana Maria is a UNITAR facilitator and also an advisor on ozone protection, climate change, water resources, and sustainable development policy and law. During the last block, we'll have Q&A in case there's any specific questions you want to ask the panelists, and then we'll close the webinar and share with you a short course evaluation. It will take you 2 minutes. We kindly ask you to please stay online at the end of the webinar so you can provide with your feedback. During the webinar, if you want to ask any questions, please post your questions in the Q&A forum. You will see there's an icon in the middle of the screen that says Q&A. Kindly note that we will give priority to participants who pose your questions there, but you don't need to wait until the end of the webinar. You on the contrary, we encourage you to pose your questions in the Q&A forum as soon as possible. To streamline the communication, as you're a large group of participants and our time is limited, please remember to post your concrete question in the Q&A forum, and whenever you type the question, please insert your name and country so the panelists can address directly to you. To avoid any background noises and not to overload the Zoom meeting, please don't turn on your camera or your microphone unless you're invited to speak. Today's webinar will last 90 minutes and it will be recorded. The webinar is also going to be streamlined on Unitar's Facebook account in case your colleagues want to see it from there. But before I give the floor to our panelists, we would like to know a little bit more about you. What is your background? What are your interests, etc. So we kindly ask you to please complete a poll. So I don't know if my colleagues can share with you this poll. It's a very short one with 4 questions. We'll show in a minute. Okay, I think now you can see it. So if you can take a couple of minutes to complete it, and then we'll start with the webinar. Thanks. Okay, we're seeing some questions coming in. So thank you. Don't be shy, just to know a little bit more about you. So. So there's a few participants still submitting the answers. Thank you. Okay, great. So we're seeing that most of you work in the field of climate change and health. So you're the right webinar. Thank you. Primarily your work interest primarily addresses both health and climate mitigations and health and adaptation. Then your role of most of you in the UNFCCC negotiations are most of you don't have a formal role, but some of you, 20%, have a status on the observer organization. And when it comes to UNFCCC, you consider yourself, or most of you, firm believer in multilateralism and fully support it as the path to solving global challenges. And we have 8% of skeptics. So yeah, thank you also for being here. So thank you so much for taking the time and for sharing with us a bit of information about yourself. So now let's move to the first presentation. Ms. Elena Villalobos-Prats was a technical officer climate change and health at WHO. We talk about multi-party negotiations on climate change and health. So without any further ado, Elena, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Patricia, and thanks so much to all UNITAR colleagues for this great collaboration and inviting WHO to be part of this launch. While I try to make this now, I would like just to say that I represent the Climate Change and Health team, and behind this presentation there is the work of Marina Mallero, Arthur Wims, Alexandra Gorova, and then under the guidance of Jeremy Campbell-Lendron. So I'm just the voice that was selected today for this presentation. It is interesting to see that most of the participants are really working or studying climate change. So 60%, I think that is nice, because you all will help us also to identify additional entry points to ensure that health is properly reflected and promoted through any climate change policy and process. So I will just start by saying that while we started following the negotiations, and mainly my colleague Marina Mallero, I think that what we were finding in the basically all the UNFCCC process is that observers, parties, and even some key people in the Secretariat, they didn't have a clear understanding on why health and WHO was present in the negotiations. And it is very positive, even if we were a little bit skeptical at the beginning also on how much we could make sure that the health message was passed. It is very positive to see that health is being seen really as a priority area, as an argument also to ensure that ambition is increased in governments and private sector and all the actors that have to make something to mitigate and to adapt to climate change. So basically, as you all know, climate change and climate variability are causing huge health impacts. These are directly caused by extreme weather events, for example, but are also caused by changes in mosquitoes, also the geographical area where we can find them. So basically places that before didn't have any malaria or dengue, due to changes in temperature, humidity, now they are seeing that this has become a real problem for them. Of course, this is indirectly also related to malnutrition, especially undernutrition. And then something that is seen more and more is the interlinkage between air pollution as a driver of climate change, and of course the great impact that is causing to the health of the population. As you know, there are 7 million deaths every year linked to air pollution. And again, this is also contributing to climate change. Something that is very important also with regards to the negotiation and with regards to the health impacts of climate change is equity. Because this is not only a principle in the UNFCCC with regards to common but differentiated responsibility. So equity is a real principle that has to be integrated in all the debates, in all the negotiations, and in all potential support to countries to both that and mitigate. But it's also related to health, because as you can see in the upper side of the map, you will see that the map is not, the form has been adapted just to represent the emissions. So basically you will see that North America, Europe, and some bits in Asia are very big because they are basically responsible for most of the emissions. And then if you look to the part below, you will see that Europe is almost non-existent, North America is very small, but then Africa, some bits in Asia, Central America are huge because they are the ones that will feel the greatest impacts with regards to health. As you all know, there is a WHO manifesto for a healthy recovery from COVID. So basically, well, there is not a direct linkage between climate change and COVID. At least there is no evidence that shows this connection. It is certain that health systems will face, also due to climate change, different outbreaks and different potential pandemics. If they are not strong enough, they will not manage to deal with those. So basically, in face of this unprecedented challenge that health systems across the world basically face with the COVID, WHO was quite fast in developing this manifesto, which basically includes 6 prescriptions for a healthy and green recovery that are listed there. So basically is protect nature, ensure basic services, shift to clean energy, promote healthy, sustainable health systems, build livable cities, and stop subsidizing polluting energy sources. This is a slide that summarizes in the run-up to COP which are the different campaigns that the presidency is supporting. So you will see that there is one on adaptation and resilience, energy transition, clean transport, nature, and finance. And basically there are health aims and entry points built into all these campaigns. And then I will not spend too much time on this because there is a specific slide at the end that will talk more about the health campaigns. So basically we are working very closely with the COP26 presidency, and something that is very important, I would say, for the health community and the public health supporters is that for the first time there is a priority area for health, and there are some health initiatives that are being promoted by the presidency. There is one on building climate resilient health systems, developing low carbon sustainable health systems, promoting health within the Adaptation Research Alliance, then making sure that updated NDCs and future NDCs really look into health and integrate health co-benefits into those, and then mobilizing the health community in collaboration with NGOs. For this year, also in the margins of the COP26 in November in Glasgow, WHO will organize a global conference on health and climate change. You see there that this is co-organized with the Global Climate and Health Alliance and the Glasgow Caledonian University. And again, all the details will be decided as soon as there is a clearer picture with regards to COP26 and how this will be organized. So in this overall context, we had this very nice collaboration with UNITAR, and we came up with this climate change negotiations and health. I would say that the first version of this training, I think it was organized in 2013, and I think, Ana Maria, you were also part of this, and the training we organized in Congo-Brazzaville. So basically we realized that this was an important tool, and there was a lot of interest from countries and from health representatives, from climate change negotiators, from the civil society, and from basically all national delegations to the UNFCCC. And we thought it would be nice just to update it and to make sure that this is make it available. We did a first essay last COP, so 2 years ago, and then we thought it would be nice to just make sure that we'll develop this as part of the UNCC Learn with UNITAR colleagues. The Paris Agreement is seen as real opportunity to promote health, and this has been also promoted by the head of WHO, Dr. Tedros, and by all the health community, because really, if implemented in a way that temperature is below 2, hopefully 1.5, then this will be translated in a huge positive health impact, because basically, just to start with, we will avoid all the at least a fraction of the 7 million deaths that are caused by air pollution every year. As you can see here, this training course has 7 lessons that you can see there in the right. And then there are different entry points that have been identified for health. And then we will go into different slides now. So with regards to national commitments and reporting and planning processes at country level, it is clear that there is a clear entry point for health to be included within the nationally determined contributions from countries, but also as part of the national adaptation plans. With regards to health in the NDCs, what WHO is doing is to basically try to promote that the health co-benefits of climate change mitigation in other sectors is integrated into the NDCs. So ideally, countries aiming to reduce emissions in the energy sector, in the transport sector, in other related sectors, like, for example, agriculture, they are basically assessing how much this could be translated, the different policies in those sectors could be translated into health impacts, and then promoting those that are really maximizing health benefits. So we are trying to ensure that health is integrated into the mitigation section. Also, if adaptation is included into the NDCs, then making sure that information on impacts and then on actions and priorities for building resilience of health systems or for promoting health within adaptation options in other sectors, for example, water, sanitation, waste management, are also integrated into these NDCs. And then with regards to national adaptation plans, WHO is also supporting countries to conduct climate change and health vulnerability and adaptation assessments, and then to use this evidence to develop comprehensive plans for addressing the medium and long-term needs in the health sector. So this is included in the training. With regards to health adaptation, of course, there are entry points, not only in the NAPS, which was the previous planning process, the NAPS, but also adaptation committee, funding, and this commitment to really support 50% of the new funding, this 300 billion that developing countries have committed to support developed countries have committed to support developing countries. And then also, of course, there is a lot of work to be done in collaboration with the LEC to support the least developed countries and then the NAPS. So basically those two diagrams that you see in this slide, the one in the right is just the WHO operational framework for building climate resilient health systems. So basically, looking at the building blocks of health systems that are represented in the middle is basically finance, information systems, sustainable technologies and infrastructure, service delivery, and policies and governance. WHO developed 10 components or functions that have to be strengthened to make sure that health systems become resilient to climate change. So a lot of what we are discussing is related to information systems with the VNAs, to leadership and governance with NDCs, NAPS, but also with strengthening surveillance systems and using climate and weather information to inform what happens with regards to service delivery. And then basically how we structure our work, supporting countries, is reflected in the slide on the left. Basically, we do a lot to assess health impacts and also co-benefits of climate change. We do work to support countries planning how to address those impacts at all levels, in population health, in healthcare facilities, and then supporting countries to try to access funding for health, climate change funding for health, both for adaptation and mitigation, also mitigation within the health sector and how service delivery is given. And then implementing, of course, actions, and then monitoring progress on climate change and health at national level. Health impacts, this is really related to loss and damages, the Warsaw International Mechanism, and health considered as a non-economic loss. This Ana Maria will be providing more information on how this can be done within the negotiation streams. But of course, there is a lot of evidence just pointing out to the impacts of climate change. Here you see a New York Times news that says that more than a third of heat deaths are tied to climate change. Then finance. This is an interesting point, because whether countries really prioritize health as a climate sensitive sector, this, I mean, basically in their NDCs and in their NAPs, when you compare this prioritization with the funds they are accessing, basically the only mismatch is in the health sector. So basically, if they are prioritizing 5 sectors, let's say water, agriculture, health, you name it, all those priority sectors are being able to access climate change funding, but then when it goes to health, this is the only mismatch, and you find it in assessments that have been presented to the Green Climate Fund. There are entry points that to support health, especially in the Adaptation Fund, the Green Climate Fund, and then more work to be done probably under the new finance goal, and the Standing Committee on Finance, and the different funding streams that are available. What you see on the right is a graph that summarizes the information that comes from the WHO Health and Climate Change Survey report that was prepared in 2019. So basically, countries are requested to fill in a survey on climate change and health, which looks at different, basically all the components of the WHO operational framework, plus others related to climate change mitigation and co-benefits. And basically they were asked which were the major challenges in accessing international funds for climate change and health. And basically 35 countries said that this was a lack of information on opportunities, 28 lack of connection by health actors to climate change processes. In my opinion, the first two are basically talking about disconnection with what is happening in the climate change agenda, because basically they were not aware or they couldn't get into these processes. And then a third very important point is related to lack of capacity to prepare country proposals. So basically from WHO, we are trying to make sure that those challenges are addressed. This is a summary slide that again, Ana Maria will provide further information, probably as we think health is really and should be represented in these entry points at the COP26. Carbon markets, Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, transparency, response measures, agriculture, gender, biodiversity, and indigenous peoples and youth. In COP24, 3 years ago, I think, WHO with the whole public health community, basically my colleague Marina Mayero is working closely with all the public health community. Basically, they prepare this report, a special report on health and climate change, which was requested by Fiji, basically. And then what we are doing for COP26 is to prepare an update of this report. And then it will include regional case studies, again, submitted by the whole public health community globally. Will include recommendations and concrete steps to deliver on health in the Paris Agreement, and then also strong linkages to the biodiversity agenda and the WHO manifesto. And basically we provide also evidence, updated evidence and key recommendations for action. Again, linked to the COP26 health initiative on climate resilient health systems and low carbon emission health systems. This initiative was launched at the 12th Petersburg Climate Dialogue in May. And basically it was launched in partnership with the UK, Egypt, Bangladesh, Malawi, Netherlands, and other countries. Fiji and Spain had a championing role in this launch, and basically requested countries to commit to conduct climate change and health vulnerability and adaptation assessment, develop climate change and health national adaptation plans, develop an action plan or roadmap by a set date to develop a sustainable low carbon health system. Colleagues in Healthcare Without Harm are really doing a key role with regards to this initiative, and then making sure that there is climate finance for health action. So we are very happy to be working so closely with the UK and the Adaptation Action Coalition and reaching out to countries to make sure that those commitments are made in the run-up to COP26. Ways forward and how you all can help to promote health as a real argument to increase commitments and ambition from countries, is endorsing the health arguments for climate change and the COP26 special report and recommendations. If you think you can contribute from your own knowledge and experience to this report, please feel free to reach out to us, and we will be happy to make sure that your contributions are properly reflected. Because again, this is not a WHO report. This is a report that is backed up by the whole public health community. Then if you are representing a country, please reach out to the UK and to WHO, and then assess whether you are interested in committing to these initiatives on health. If you have a say in updating your NDCs, please consider how you can promote health and make sure that those NDCs are healthy ones. If you have the possibility to reach out to the public health community or you are part of it, please, we need you to reach out to also us and to all your constituencies, because you have a great power to mobilize others. And then, of course, advance research on climate change and human health if you have a say on that. Thanks so much. This is it from WHO.
Thank you so much, Elena, for your presentation and about how can we all contribute to promote health and climate change. So thanks a lot, Elena. So now we'll move to the second part of the webinar. This session will be delivered by Ms. Ana Maria Kleiner, as I mentioned in the beginning. Ana Maria has been working for UNITAR as a trainer for many years, and she's also an advisor on ozone protection, climate change, water resources, and sustainable development policy and law. Her presentation will be on climate change negotiations and health. The exact topic is identifying, preparing, and negotiating health issues under the UNFCCC negotiations on health. Kindly note that this is an interactive presentation, so please don't be shy. Don't hesitate to pose your questions in the Q&A forum during the webinar. Please remember to type your name and country, so this way you can address to you. So, Ana Maria, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Patricia, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone joining from around the world. One of the greatest things about this technology revolution is that we are able to come together from far-reaching parts of the world where we might not have been able to do the same in a face-to-face webinar or conference. And so it's wonderful to have you all here. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us and be part of today's event. So as Patricia said, I will be hosting you during this second part of the webinar. It is intended to be more interactive. I firmly believe that we learn more from each other than we do from presenters and panelists. So this is an opportunity for you all to use the Q&A, ask any question that comes to mind. And also, if you see questions in the Q&A, or if you want to just give comments in the chat section, you are invited to do that. This will allow us to connect worldwide with each other's minds and explore and learn together. So please do that. So I am going to share my presentation now, and we'll get to work. This is just a little overview of what the session is today, all of the portions of our webinar. And as Patricia mentioned, I am an international environmental lawyer, and I specialize in a number of different topics. I imagine many of you also have a widespread number of issues that you work on. Nowadays, we tend to be be multifaceted in the work that we do. And that's also how we get some of the best results, because we bring the knowledge and experience from different sectors together to find solutions to problems and challenges that tend to also be multifaceted. So that's why we wanted to know a little bit about you earlier. And again, I invite you in the chat if you'd like to tell us a little bit more about, you know, some of the different dimensions of the work that you do or of your background. It would be wonderful to learn a little bit more about you all through the chat, and also for you all to learn about each other. I have been a negotiator since 2006, where I began representing a country I worked with in the climate negotiations, ozone negotiations, biodiversity, and decertification. So I have a little bit of experience under my belt. I will tell you very honestly that when you come into these negotiations right at the beginning, they can feel very overwhelming. They can be very complex. There are a lot of acronyms that don't make sense. And so if some of the things that you are seeing today, because I think only a few of you are negotiators or do work in the negotiations directly, maybe as observer organizations, but then you may be a little baffled by some of the language and some of the terminology. Don't worry, you'll learn it, you'll pick it up, especially if you want to stay involved and answer the call that Elena put to you to participate and collaborate, contributing to the national determined contributions in your country. The more you know about how this system works, the stronger that you will be in terms of your contribution and your inputs to the process. And we'll see in a minute why that is so absolutely important that you get involved. Just one, last little piece. I am dedicated and passionate about capacity building. I think that it is the solution to so many of the challenges that we're trying to address, and at least the foundation. And so this is why I believe that the work that UNITAR and UNCC Learn does is so important and so interesting. And I encourage you to look more into other webinars and courses that they offer. Patricia and I have been working for years on a climate change negotiation course that's online. It's really interesting, and maybe be something that you can build on from this webinar if you want to learn more. Okay, so we have already learned quite a bit from Elena's presentation about the nexus between climate change, climate negotiations, and health. Climate and health are both what you'll oftentimes hear referred to as cross-cutting issues. They are not a topic or a sector in themselves, but they actually run across every other sector in society and influence them. So even though in our countries we'll oftentimes see that there is a Ministry of Health or Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, usually those two ministries are working hand in hand constantly with a number, a variety of other ministries, because as Elena pointed out, agriculture has to do with health, agriculture has to do with climate change, gender has to do with health, education has to do with health. So really every other aspect of human society, of our countries and our political systems have these two issues sort of cutting across the work that we do and the goals that we have. At the nexus of climate and health is, in my opinion, one of the strongest inspirations and motivations for us and for everyone to get involved and to do something to make the world better. Climate change, when oftentimes we'll see the polar bears or the icebergs. These are beautiful images and they're inspiring, and yet they don't often touch home, right? Not many of us have icebergs in our backyard or polar bears in our national parks. And so while we understand those as symbols, sometimes they're not as relevant to our day-to-day life. On the other hand, anything that has to do with health impacts actually concerns us as individuals, communities, and societies directly, because it has to do with our quality of life. It has to do with the well-being of future generations. It has to do with our productivity in our work and in our economies. And so when we find those topics that bring together climate change and health, many of those that Elena pointed out to us, air pollution, heat waves, infant mortality, and these other things, those topics really inspire us to take action, because all of us want to have a safe and healthy future for ourselves, our families, and for the future generations. International health and climate policy, therefore, have a lot of shared goals. And as such, when policymakers and those of us who work on one or another topic, or sometimes on both topics, as we advance in our goals and in the impact, the positive impact that we're having in one area, it influences and it supports the other. That's what we oftentimes hear about when people will refer to the co-benefits. So when a mitigation project has co-benefits for health, because reducing, for example, black carbon from the air, the soot that we sometimes breathe, that's expelled from big trucks and things like that. When we reduce that for climate purposes, we're also having a positive influence on health. So another reason why it's really inspiring and motivating to work on projects that meet both of these goals. Worldwide, there are multiple forums that address both climate and health. Today, we're going to talk about the UNFCCC, but I want to just take a second and get you to put on your thinking caps and think for a moment, beyond the UNFCCC, what are some of the other forums that you can think of that address both climate and health issues? Could be a forum, could be an initiative, maybe something that you have been involved in, could be global, or maybe it could be local. Just think for a moment. If you want to type it into the chat, cool. Others can see what your ideas are, but just give yourself a moment to stretch your minds beyond just the UNFCCC. This is important to think about this, because as we know, everything is interconnected, and we don't necessarily work in silos, especially on topics that are so cross-cutting. So again, if you can think of another initiative where climate and health are being addressed, perhaps the work being done in that initiative can be brought in to leverage some of the goals and objectives that we have in the UNFCCC. And you'll see how those come up. Elena mentioned some of them at the end of her presentation, if you want to go back later on and look at her presentation. And I encourage you to make those connections. It's like creating a constellation in your mind, where you see the area or perhaps the initiative you're working on, and then connect it to all the others that those around you, or maybe various ones that you're working on yourself. And you'll see how connecting them together can help pool resources, and it can help increase the impact that you have. So the UNFCCC, as it's sometimes referred to, because United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change is a mouthful. And UNFCCC, as many of you probably know, is a convention that was agreed to in the 1990s, in the early 90s, at a summit called the Rio Summit, or the Earth Negotiation, or the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And at that summit, countries from around the world came together and had a group of environmental agreements that they put in motion. Those agreements include the UNFCCC, as well as the Biodiversity Convention, decertification, some chemicals agreements, and since then, those were the foundational agreements. And since then, countries and their negotiators have been refining, evolving, and specifying exactly what do we intend to do in terms of these commitments under the convention. The convention has broad commitments relating to reduction of greenhouse gases, relating to adaptation and the need for both mitigation and adaptation to climate change, as well as broad commitments to supporting developing countries in their efforts to both mitigate and adapt. The convention is not very long. If you are curious, you don't have to be a lawyer to understand it. You might want to look it up one day and just take a peek and read through it and see what exactly were countries thinking over 30 years ago, or about 30 years ago now, when they put this concept together and agreed as a global community to work on this challenge. The reason why they came together to work on this challenge, and this is really relevant for health, is because climate change, like many health issues or challenges, does not respect borders, national borders. Where the source of the climate problem goes into the atmosphere, spreads around the world, and the impacts or the results of those greenhouse gases in the atmosphere end up affecting countries, people, living beings worldwide. So it's in our collaboration that we are able to address the sources that might be in countries, but that actually have these global impacts. We are able to see that vision together and work on those solutions together. Climate change negotiations have three main phases. And these are very broad phases, and we're going to break them down in a minute. The first phase is preparation, understanding what it is that you're going to try to agree to, becoming an expert or bringing together your experts on that topic. The next phase is the actual negotiations themselves, where we devised agreements around specific topics. And then the third phase is the implementation of those agreements. And you'll see here these arrows, feedback, because once we are implementing, the information and what we're learning, our experience in implementation, feeds back into the next negotiations and into our preparations and our quest for additional information and understanding. Take a moment to just think to yourself, in your work, at first glance, which one of these phases does your work potentially come under? Are you perhaps a scientist or a medical professional that is involved in research and that can be relevant to your country's negotiating position, or that helps your country and your government understand the impacts of health and climate in country? Are you a negotiator? I know there are a few of you out there, or maybe you're on a negotiation delegation as an expert. Or are you helping to prepare projects to help implement some of the parts of the treaty? In the preparation phase, this is just a brief overview, and each one of these sections can be broken down into very, very many more. But just to give you a summary of what do we mean by preparation. Information and understanding is the key and the foundation to our ability to actually come to any kind of decision, right? If those of you who participated in the first webinar will recall from the negotiation skills training that a good negotiator is well prepared and understands his or her topics and is able to bring that knowledge and understanding to the negotiation table. Climate negotiations, just like health initiatives, are driven and informed by science. So one of the key sources of information that we're going to use and that we do use in the climate negotiations is science. Many of you or all of you have probably heard of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, which is a scientific body made up of some of the greatest scientific minds from around the world. They are based out of the World Meteorological Organization, the WMO, and countries have agreed that the reports that the IPCC puts together are the foundational reports, or the reports that we refer to in our decision making around the climate negotiations. There are many other reports from the WHO, for example, and from other research institutions that are relevant. The IPCC scientists, they take into consideration all of those reports, or many of those reports that are published and peer reviewed in the reports that they put together. It may sound a little bit complicated, but it's to show that, you know, that body is actually like a huge web of knowledge and scientific experience. Another source of information for preparation, and this is where your work may come into the picture, is consultations. And every country does consultations at home before coming to the UNFCCC negotiations, where the government will hold meetings, or sometimes NGOs will host those meetings and ask questions and get inputs from different groups, from various institutions, from the community level all the way up to the government level. And that information feeds into national reports and also into the definition of what is the country position. What does our country want when we go to the negotiation table at the UNFCCC? Assessment and strategy are another aspect of preparing your position. Once the government brings together a lot of information, there's a step where the negotiators and the negotiation team has to think, okay, what is it that my country needs in terms of mitigation, in terms of adaptation or capacity, and how are we going to get there? What do we need to ask for specifically? What are the particular forums in the negotiations that we have opportunities to ask for that? And who are the other players around the negotiation table? What are the other countries that have the same position as us, who could be our allies, or that have different positions than us? They may be our counterpart, but it's important to know that. So the assessment and strategy part is very, very closely linked to this team and alliance building in the preparation phase for negotiations. Here's another question for you. Are the health and climate sources and contacts the same in each of these categories? So if you're thinking about who are the people who are going to be involved in this preparation phase, are they the same people? Are they different people? If you were in charge of preparing your government delegation for negotiations, who in your country would you be bringing to the table? Would you do it all in one meeting? Would it be a small group? Would it be dozens or hundreds of people? Just give yourself a moment to daydream about what that might look like in your opinion. And if you are already involved in some respect, it's interesting to evaluate, well, how does it really happen versus how would I like to see it happen? If it's different, if you think that there are other steps that your government can be taking to better prepare for negotiations, Well, this is where Elena's question again becomes important. How can you get involved in, for example, the development of your nationally determined contribution, your NDC, in its development, in its implementation? What do you have to contribute? Many large countries and developed countries have huge teams of people, even in the government, specialists, experts, economists, engineers, lots of people on their delegations and even in their teams, in their ministries of environment and climate change. But other countries, for example, small Pacific Island countries or smaller African, Asian countries might have a very lean team and resources can be very, very limited. So in that regard as well, to those of you who checked the box at the beginning that you are neither a negotiator nor on the delegation, but perhaps you work for an NGO or you work in a different aspect of society, think about how you might be able to contribute and strengthen your country's preparation phase so that the negotiators who do go are best prepared to deliver on the interests, the true interests and representative interests of the country. So now for the negotiation phase. And there may be months in preparing for the negotiations, and then the negotiations themselves are only days or a few weeks. Who negotiates? Members of the government delegation negotiate. Not all of those members have to be government officials or government functionaries. You can be on a government delegation if your government invites you to be a negotiator or an advisor, an expert in the delegation. But the government decides and defines who is on their delegation. Some governments are very open about this and say, anyone from the country who wants who will be going to these negotiations are invited to be on our delegation. Others are much more restrictive. When you are a member of the delegation, that gives you the right to sit at the negotiation table and speak on behalf of a country. Now, within the government delegation, there's usually a head of delegation, and in the preparations and strategy, this is part of what's defined, who decides which one of the people in the delegation is going to participate in which one of the negotiation topics. Where are these negotiations held? Well, in different specified negotiation forums. You've all probably heard of the Conference of the Parties, and the Conference of the Parties takes place once a year. The UNFCCC, that's the big meeting where decisions are taken annually. And within that conference, there are many, many different negotiation rooms where the various topics are negotiated. And we'll see that in a second, how it breaks down. For the UNFCCC, there are two main negotiating periods. There's the mid-year negotiations called the subsidiary body negotiations, and those are happening right now. I'll give you a sneak peek at what that looks like. Some of you may be involved. And then the year-end negotiations, the Conference of the Parties and the Conference of the Meeting of the Parties, kind of a lot of acronyms again, but the important thing to take away is this is where the decisions are made every year. Decisions are not made at the mid-year meeting. Decisions are prepared and negotiations are happening, and then the final decision is made at the end of the year. What exactly is negotiated there? Well, different aspects of past decisions that are unresolved. Perhaps they're unresolved because there wasn't enough time or there wasn't enough consensus to make a decision. Or perhaps the previous decision said, next year, once our new executive committee, for example, is functioning, the executive committee should decide exactly what its agenda will be for their first session, something like that, right? And so, the decisions can be, they build upon each other. The other aspect that is often negotiated are the mechanisms and instruments of the convention. So you may have heard of, for example, the Adaptation Fund or the Green Climate Fund. These are financial mechanisms within the climate convention that were decided or agreed upon in the climate convention. That's where they were born. And every year there are new decisions made around exactly what those mechanisms do. You may have also heard of the technology mechanism. And so, so the countries come together and say, okay, we see how it's working on the ground. Now we want to change this, or we would like to add that, or we're not happy with this. We want to take it away. I'm oversimplifying, of course, but just so you can get a picture of, well, how, exactly what is being negotiated. It's a strengthening of the convention. And by strengthening, I mean making that convention stronger in its impact and its ability to reach its goals. And the other thing that will sometimes be negotiated are new proposals. So maybe a country or a group of countries come together and say, we would like to have a new part of this convention. The Paris Agreement, for example, which you've all heard of, was at one point a new idea. It came from over a decade before, early negotiations or early discussions where countries were saying that the convention we have and its Kyoto Protocol, you've probably heard of that, which was a protocol to advance implementation of the convention. The country said they're not enough. We see that the problem of climate change is much bigger. We have to do more. So what are we going to do? And through a decade of work, over a decade of work, the countries came up with this new vision, the Paris Agreement. And that was agreed to in 2015, as you know, and now we are in the implementing phase of the agreement. It began its implementation in 2020, so we're just starting off. And when you hear about nationally determined contributions, the NDCs, those are also at one point a new idea. They became a piece of the Paris Agreement, and now countries come together to talk about how do we make these NDCs function in the best way possible so that they help us deliver the goals of the convention. Why do we do all this? To save the world, of course. So a little bit about the subsidiary bodies. This is you hear about the subsidiary bodies. What exactly does that mean? The convention covers many topics. I see it, and I like to think of it as an umbrella. It's an umbrella that has commitments, it has principles. This is why I say go and take a look at it someday if you have a minute, because you'll see that it's quite broad in what in the way that it sets out its objectives and how it will reach those objectives. Climate change, like health, touches so many different topics. In fact, it's hard to think of any aspect of life that is not either contributing to climate change or will be impacted by climate change. I have a hard time thinking of anything, to be honest. I feel like every part of our life and society and the global community have something to do with climate change. And many of those also have to do with health. So the subsidiary bodies, what they're responsible for is taking the different topics and different goals and different aspects of the convention and giving them basically a table at which countries can continue preparing and cooking the new decisions. There are two main subsidiary bodies. There's the subsidiary body for scientific and technological advice, usually just nicknamed SUBSTA. And then there's the subsidiary body for implementation, nicknamed SBI. Those two bodies, as you can imagine, have different roles. The scientific and technological advice, the SUBSTA, is responsible for gathering information, understanding better different topics. Let's take agriculture, for example, as a topic. There is a negotiation group that looks at agriculture and is trying to find solutions for the agriculture sector. And so Substa is responsible for helping to generate processes, initiatives, and support for countries so that when they are ready for implementation, so it's a preparatory part, when they're ready for implementation, that they will have everything that they need. They being the countries and even the global community. The subsidiary body for implementation makes decisions or discusses and makes decisions around actual implementation. In a way, one could say that Substa is a preparatory body for a lot of what then ends up being coming to the subsidiary body for implementation to the SBI. But it's not always step one, step two. Sometimes there are topics like finance that are being discussed in both of the bodies, and that can be a little bit confusing. I won't go into too much detail right now, because that's why you might want to sign up for one of UNITAR's courses on climate negotiations and get more details if you really want to dig into the nitty gritty of those. But just keep in mind that those are the general bodies, and under each of those bodies are a lot of different topics and themes that are negotiated. The virtual meetings this year, because of the pandemic, the UNFCCC has organized virtual negotiations. It's quite impressive how they're using the internet and virtual tools to bring people together from all over the world and many different time zones to talk about the different topics. But it's set up in a way very similar to how the actual negotiations happen. So when we get back to face-to-face meetings, which will be great to see everybody and be able to have coffee together or tea, you'll see that a lot of these are the same issues. So you see here that they're different at different times of the day. You'll have coordination meetings. Those are the negotiating groups that get together. AOSIS is the Alliance of Small Island States. G77 in China is a negotiating group of developing countries. But then here you'll see this SBI has multilateral assessment working group session. They're probably trying to come together on some new decision there. And so there's many, many, many topics. I'm going to go show you. It can feel a little bit overwhelming just how many different issues are being negotiated at the same time. No one person is responsible for every issue. Within your delegation, within a country delegation, there will be different people who are assigned to the different issues, and then oftentimes you'll be working with regional groups. So if you're from a small country like Tuvalu in the Pacific, you'll be working within the group of the small island states so that you can get support, because oftentimes delegations are not big enough. So when, as someone coming from the perspective of being interested in health and climate change, let's take a look back at what Elena pointed out to us. What are the different topics that are negotiated currently under the UNFCCC, where we have the intersection of climate and health issues. Clearly, every topic within the UNFCCC is related to climate, but not every single one has a health dimension. Lena mentioned the NDCs. These nationally determined contributions are commitments that every country has made. You can call it commitment or promise that every country has made in stating exactly what they intend to do to reduce emissions and to prepare for the impacts or to adapt to climate change. If you have not seen your country's NDC, I really strongly recommend you to do that. Every country's NDC is available on the UNFCCC website. It might be easier to just search for it on a web browser, but you can also go to UNFCCC and look for NDCs and find your country's NDC and take a look through it and look to see what are the health issues that your government in its preparation process, because there were consultations and research involved in putting together the NDCs. What has your government identified as priorities, and what have they committed to in terms of what they hope to achieve in the first 4 years or so, 4 or 5 years of the first NDC. Every 5 years, countries prepare or revise or prepare a new NDC. And each one of those revisions should be stronger and more ambitious than the previous one. This is what we as countries promised each other within the Paris Agreement, that NDCs would be our tool to addressing climate change, and that we will make that tool stronger and stronger as we move forward. NDCs, as I mentioned, include both mitigation and adaptation issues. In the negotiations on NDCs, what we're talking about right now has more to do with the formats of the NDCs. At the moment, every country has a different format. It can be a little bit difficult to compare different countries, but it's a bit more technical in terms of NDCs. When we talk about adaptation, loss and damage, and even mitigation in the negotiations, that's where you might be able to actually hone in on some of the health topics, like air pollution or other aspects that you can clearly see the health nexus. Loss and damage that Elena referred to is a part of the Paris Agreement. Actually came from earlier from the Warsaw Mechanism on Loss and Damage. This was a recognition, a decision that recognized that some countries are already experiencing climate change. We can adapt to what's going to happen in the future, but what do we do about the impacts that we're experiencing right now? Right? The impacts because of heat waves, the impacts because of droughts or flooding. And so countries are discussing what they will do and how to address that as a global community. Of course, we can imagine many ways in which health could be a part of that. MOI, the means of implementation, are financing, technology, and capacity. And in each of these, health is a topic or a sector within which, as also Elena's presentation pointed out, where you will see the opportunity to support in your country or regionally or globally, to support health goals as well. And so in the finance discussions, there may be discussions not as specifically as what will happen in country X or country Y, because that's not how the international treaty works. The international treaty works in terms of broader approaches and decisions that then have to be implemented at the national level. But the conversations do and can specify, a decision could eventually specify that financing should be prioritized for health, for example, or other related issues. Markets is a part of the convention that was inherited from the Kyoto Protocol. It was an important part of the Kyoto Protocol, and it's going to be one of the big decisions at COP26 that has to do with market mechanisms. Those are things like the green bonds and emissions trading schemes that you may be familiar with in different countries. The CDM, the Clean Development Mechanism, was the most, let's say, robust market mechanism from the Kyoto Protocol, and countries, the negotiators now are devising the new structure, the new approach. Transparency that Elena also mentioned has to do with reporting, has to do with the ability for all countries to just keep an eye on each other and ensure that that every country is is delivering on its promises. One of the big differences between the Paris Agreement and previous agreements or other climate or other environmental treaties is that the Paris Agreement uses a bottom-up approach where each country says, "This is what I'm able to do, and I commit to delivering on it." Whereas other treaties tend to say, "This is what we expect everyone to do, top down," and then countries are required to comply with those shared goals. We do have shared goals in the UNFCCC, but the tool, the mechanism to arrive at those goals, this our new tool, the NDCs, are different in each individual country in terms of its level of commitment, level of contribution, and this is particularly responsive to a concept you may have heard of, which is a principle under the convention called common but shared responsibilities. The common but shared responsibilities principle in the UNFCCC says that every country has a common responsibility to address climate change, right, to help solve this problem, but that those responsibilities are different depending on the capacity, the level of development that a country has, maybe its size, maybe its contribution to climate change, that it varies from place to place. And so in the NDCs, you see that every country is going to have a different approach, a different level of ambition, a different goals within these broader categories. And in transparency and reporting, one of the things that we want to see as those who are interested in health is, to what extent is health used as an indicator? To what extent are we measuring the impacts and the benefits to health of the work that we're doing? To what extent do we ask countries to ensure that that's a part of their goals and their NDCs? These are some of the things that countries are working out in the current negotiations. And we talked a little bit about agriculture. That's one of the subtopics. There are a few others. It's as I mentioned, it's very multifaceted, these negotiations, and so there may be others that I haven't mentioned here that you can think of or that you are involved in. That's another a question for you to reflect on after the presentation. And then there are additional cross-cutting issues: gender, biodiversity, youth. These are issues that don't necessarily have their own negotiating table, specifically focusing on that, but they're topics that come up in many of the issues that we see in this left-hand column, and as aspects to take into consideration. They're cross-cutting like health. And as we know, they also cross-cut with health. And so sometimes you may want to look for gender, biodiversity, youth references to see also where an additional health nexus or connection could be in terms of identifying challenges, in terms of developing solutions, in terms of strengthening implementation. And finally, implementation. This decision, as you know, this is just a little recap. You know, every decision that's made under the UNFCCC requires implementation. That's why we decide to do something. Every single member state then must comply with the decision. We talked about the NDCs, but there's also the national adaptation plans. What we're required to do as countries is implement those decisions at the national level, bring it into the national context, and pass laws or whatever is required at our national level within our system to carry out those decisions, to implement them. We implement them through national policies, through projects, through different initiatives, by financing, by working cooperatively within the institutions and across the different government institutions. All hands on board, I say, because it's not just the government's responsibility to implement, it's actually, it requires the participation of every aspect of society, non-governmental, private sector, etc. See if you can think of 3 different actors in your country who are involved in implementation of global decisions. Maybe someone or some department within the government. Maybe think of somebody, even in the institution that you work in. Can you think of at least 3? The means of implementation that are discussed in the climate negotiations are basically 3: financing, technology, and capacity. The Framework Convention includes commitments that say that developed countries will help the developing countries to implement the convention. And so there are many discussions, and there have been many decisions, and we're building upon those decisions that have to do with exactly how will this happen? How much financing and technology? How will it be done? Where will it be done? Who will have to do it? And how does the international system support the progress on those means of implementation? These are absolutely critical parts of the convention for advancing the climate and health goals and objectives. And I encourage you to look at and think about where you and your work or the topics that you're interested in might be served by support in implementation for one of these 3, or all of these 3 aspects of the means of implementation. So as we get towards the end here, and I want to give some chance to answer questions, and everything we agree to must be implemented. And I like to say that climate, when you add climate and health goals, you get to development. It's very, I think, exciting and encouraging to be working in climate and or health, because the work that you do is contributing to making a better world. Every little step that you take forward is going to make a safer planet and a better planet for the future, but also for the near term. We know that there is a huge crisis, this climate crisis. But your dedication and your optimism are absolutely necessary so that we can solve that crisis. And while we're solving that crisis, hey, make a better world and stronger societies, healthier societies while we're at it. As I've discussed, negotiation is a blend of technical knowledge, expertise, information, science, the scientists, the means of implementation, but it also comes together with political will and vision. So the high-level political people, heads of state, and their political vision is really important as well in driving our work forward. If a government is particularly committed to addressing climate and health goals, that will help to access financing. It will help unblock some of the obstacles that there may be in terms of reaching those goals. If a government is more is prioritizing other issues, it can make it more difficult for us to achieve those goals. The discussions at the table are critical, those where we make decisions, but discussions in the corridors and other global processes are equally important. And you may have picked up on some of those from Elena's presentation. Think for a moment, what other global processes or forums address climate and health that can directly or indirectly influence the UNFCCC negotiations? Maybe think of something that you read about in the newspaper over the weekend. That's a hint. There are so many different processes that influence the negotiations that are happening outside that you might be involved in, even if you're not directly involved in the UNFCCC. And as I mentioned earlier, think about the constellation. How do these processes and institutions connect to the UNFCCC? in preparation, in implementation, in preparation, in negotiation, or in implementation, maybe all of the above. There are processes like the Sustainable Development Goals, and we'll look at those in a second, UN General Assembly, political processes like the G7 that was held last week, where a few countries, powerful countries that have many resources and that are also major contributors to climate change, are saying we're going to do more to address this problem. Non-governmental processes, and of course, historic and natural events and crises also impact the negotiations. The health crisis, COVID-19, and I really like that part of Elena's negotiation, really bringing us into focus on what we're going through right now. How is the response to COVID-19 potentially going to help us also address climate change and the health goals and concerns that we have? Take one last second here. Just take a look through this list. These are our Sustainable Development Goals. Do you see any here, or which ones of them do you believe, do you feel address both climate and health? One might argue that every single one of them. All right, I think instead of putting a question to you, I will take a moment to look at some of your questions, or invite you all to send some questions now that Elena or I can address.
Thank you so much, Ana Maria, for the interesting and comprehensive presentation. As Ana Maria was saying, now we're moving to the Q&A block. So I would like to thank all the participants that have been posting questions in the Q&A forum. I think Elena has already answered most of the questions, so thank you, Elena, for that. We still have approximately 5 minutes left. So if there's any pressing question, please don't hesitate to post your questions in the Q&A forum so our panelists can answer. I see we have two questions from Cara Alonso and Aniek Solansky. So the question from Cara Alonso is, climate change and climate crisis are the same thing? So I don't know if Ana Maria or Elena, any one of you want to jump in.
Why don't I jump in on that one, and I'll leave the second one to Elena, because it's a little harder. She can answer the hard question, and because it also specifically mentions WHO, if that's okay with you, Elena. So climate change and climate crisis, are they the same thing? It's a great question, right? Because it's really important. Language matters, and the words that we choose really do matter. So climate change is what we use to refer to the phenomenon of what the world is experiencing. Climate change is in fact the natural changes in the climate, but in the way that we refer to it, we, the planet, in every form that you hear about it, has to do with the rapid change in the climate due to human contribution, right? And what's sometimes you'll hear of as anthropogenic source or anthropogenic contribution to a changing climate. Climate change includes the source of this changing climate, all of the understanding that all of these human activities contribute to the changing climate, the rapidly heating globe, and changes in meteorological events. But also climate change includes and encompasses the vision of what are the impacts of climate change. It's not just, that the planet is slightly heating up, but everything that means. I encourage you to take a look at one of my favorite sources for understanding the different aspects of what does climate change include, which is the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Their website is fantastic. So is the UNFCCC. They've got good, concise summaries of that. The climate crisis, when you hear about that, that has a more political connotation. What changes when we talk about crisis, in my opinion, and of course, some of you may have other opinions, but in my opinion, when we talk about crisis, what we're saying is there is something so radically difficult, or the risks are so great that this poses a crisis to the world, a crisis that if it's not responded to, could be detrimental to the planet. And so that crisis element is the call to attention, and it's the call to respond. And who does that call go to? Well, in fact, it goes to us all. Remember, all hands on board. But in particular, in this context, in UNFCCC, and because of the way the world is governed today, that call goes to governments. And it says, there is a crisis, there is a huge problem. It absolutely must be attended to. We must find solutions and collaborate together. And I'll let the other question for Elena.
Perfect. Thank you, Ana Maria, for your insight. So as it's almost 4:30 here in Geneva, we can take the last question. So we have received one question from Kadija. He asked, what will be an important output of the negotiations in COP 2016 about health and climate change, raise funding, institutional dispositions, etc.? So I would like to give the floor to Elena in case you can jump in.
Thank you, Patricia. I think this is a very, very good question. And probably all the things that you are listing in your comment are very important, of course, funding. But the most important thing would be that countries negotiating and countries debating how to tackle climate change basically agree to do so. To do so in an urgent manner and to do so in the way that basically all health will be promoted. So I think that's the best outcome that we could have, that ambition is increased and that countries are committed to really tackle climate change. Yeah, the rest is just details.
Perfect, great. Thank you so much, Elena. So thank you to all participants for your engagement and motivation. And thank you again, Elena and Ana Maria, for your valuable insight and sharing with us your knowledge in the field of health and climate change negotiations. I would like to seize the opportunity because I saw a few questions in the chat box. Yes, that we wanted to mention about the e-learning course that was developed between WHO, UNCCLearn, and UNITAR. The course is Climate Change Negotiations on Health. We have shared several times the link in the chat box. My colleagues will post it again in case you want to register. We would like also to thank WHO and UNCCLearn for their continuous support and for our continuous collaboration. Last but not least, I would like to share with you a short evaluation about the webinar. So if you can stay online for 1-2 minutes, it's very short evaluation. It would take more than 2 minutes, we promise. So if you can please give us your feedback about the webinar, that will be very, very helpful. So thank you everyone again, and we look forward to seeing you in our training activities in the near future.